At one point or another, we have all watched movies where a country, in the name of protecting national interest, engages in biological research that would lead to the creation of bioweapons. And at the end of the day, either the bioweapon is at risk of falling into the wrong hands, or a mistake in the lab would lead to the spread of the bioweapon, which could be a virus or a pathogen, thereby endangering innocent people who do not know what is going on. And when the citizens are infected with the virus, the government will be trying to cover up their mistakes. Now, one thing that would probably go through everybody's mind is, why would a government engage in researching and creating something that is dangerous not just to its citizens but to citizens across the world? Which national interest are they protecting? Well, one country that needs to answer this question is the USA. Now, if the USA had all its biolabs in its country, then that wouldn't be our business, but research has shown that the USA is the only country in the world that has biolabs in all the regions of the world, including Africa. In fact, it is reported that the US has over 30 biolabs in Africa and over 400 across the globe. Can you imagine that? 400 biolabs. Why do they need so many biolabs in Africa? What are they researching in these labs, and how do African governments allow the US to set up so many biolabs across the continent? These are questions that need to be answered. Since the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, it has become indisputably clear that the US has been involved in creating and developing biolaboratories throughout the world. The first US biolabs were established in Africa in the late 1990s to fight AIDS and malaria. But like we said earlier, the numbers have increased to over 400 units. When asked, the US would say that they are researching biological threats to the world and finding solutions to fight these threats. But in reality, they are simply using this as an excuse to research and create bioweapons that they can add to their already long arsenal of weapons. Just last year, before the Russia-Ukraine war, the Defense Ministry of Russia stated that the United States was using Ukrainian laboratories to develop biological weapons that would be spread by specially trained migratory birds and diseased bats. It was also said that the US was doing this under the guise of anti-terrorist projects and activities that were permitted by the Biological Weapons Convention. But guess what? The US denied it, and some blogs even claimed that Russia was spreading misinformation about the US. However, the documents obtained by Russia showed that the US military-funded labs in Ukraine had been creating biological weapon components and testing them on the population of the country. But that's not all. Robert Kennedy Jr., a US politician, confirmed this year, 2023, that the US truly has biolabs where they produce illegal bioweapons in Ukraine. This means Russia was not lying. In October 2023, the Russian defense military again raised concerns that the United States is allegedly transferring its dual-use biological research to Africa, where it's believed to be conducting illegal and dangerous experiments with potential bioweapon agents in African countries. Although the US has again denied the allegations, the fact is that if Russia wasn't lying about the first allegations, then it certainly couldn't be lying about this. According to Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, a senior lecturer at the Department of History and Political Studies at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, the reason why the US is shifting its biological research to Africa is that the US is trying to expand its influence on the African continent, given that Africa is a strategic place that has always been a geopolitical battleground between great powers because of its resources. Dr. Breakfast stated that he believes that since the US already has lots of military bases in Africa, the biolabs would simply be subsumed into the military. Can you see another reason why Africa needs to dismantle all the foreign military bases on the continent? The report released by Russia also added that one of the reasons why the biolabs are set up in Africa is because it would be very easy for them to conduct dangerous experiments on the local African population without protest. Also, these experiments would be much cheaper to carry out in Africa and do not carry reputational risk. It may look as if these US labs are simple labs that were set up to help fight deadly diseases, but the fact is that these labs, where strains of deadly diseases are developed in Africa, are a threat to the African continent. Imagine if any of these deadly diseases, be they viruses or pathogens, happened to escape the lab. How disastrous would that be, especially for the African continent, where the expertise and equipment needed to contain these diseases are not yet available? Interestingly, these scenarios have happened a couple of times. According to reports by experts, wherever there has been an outbreak of an epidemic in Africa, there has always been a U.S. lab close by. In Liberia, some articles published by Dr. Cyril Broderick, an infection and microbiological diseases expert, condemned the United States for creating and spreading Ebola fever pathogens. Dr. Cyril found out that epidemic outbreaks happen in the regions where the American biological laboratories are located. He also added that the secret operations of the U.S. are aimed at creating and spreading the deadly virus, and that Ebola and AIDS were genetically modified organisms developed by military organizations in North America as biological weapons and specially delivered to Africa for testing. In Kanema City State Hospital, Sierra Leone, where over 13,000 people were killed due to the Ebola virus, it was discovered that there was an American laboratory funded by the George Soros and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. And guess what? Even if the U.S. has repeatedly denied that their biolabs do not create bioweapons, it is very easy to believe otherwise because those labs are usually high-security labs, and everything done in them is shrouded in secrecy. Whenever these outbreaks happen, the end result is always that the origin of the epidemic is unknown. It's worth mentioning that during the Ebola virus outbreak, the specialists operating on the scene were mostly Europeans and Americans. During that period, they gathered over 250,000 blood samples and took them to their countries for studies without the consent of their patients. This unlawful move allowed European and American pharmaceutical corporations to use the blood of African people who didn't agree to become donors for free, thus saving billions of dollars while creating a vaccine. One of the patients whose blood was extracted was a Guinean woman who had code C15. The Ebola virus extracted from her blood is demonstrated on the website of the European Virus Archive, Germany's Bernhard Hocht Institute for Tropical Medicine, and sells for €3,637 for 0.5 milliliter, which is 170 times more expensive than gold. In essence, it's cheaper and more profitable to conduct bioresearch in Africa. These people whose blood was collected without permission were not even paid. Interestingly, the exact number of blood samples taken from the African people can't be found out as the American and European medics refuse to disclose any information, saying it's an issue of national security. Please, how exactly is that an issue of national security? The annoying thing about this whole situation is that, despite the fact that blood samples were taken from thousands of citizens of African countries, scientists from Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea still do not have access to these samples to conduct their own research. The U.S. refused to give them access to this research. If these bioresearches are truly for the benefit of Africa and the world, why doesn't the U.S. allow scientists from Africa to access them? Reports have shown that Africa has the highest concentration of U.S. biolabs, and Uganda is among the countries in the United States that display high interest. In Uganda, most of the medical research centers, institutes, medical schools, and biolabs, including prisons, were established by the United States and are part of one big network. According to the reports, American biologists conduct research on dangerous viral respiratory infections using prisoners without fear of any consequences. A number of Uganda's prisoners who are infected with tuberculosis are 3 times higher than among the country's civilian population. Officially, the U.S. labs have a mission to prevent and counter any biohazard and protect the local population. However, they are directly subordinate to the Pentagon and tasked with the job of providing the full range of preparations for studies of diseases, taking materials and information from the local population, and collecting the DNA of African people. Despite the concerns from all over the world about the risk of these biothreats, the United States still plans to expand the network of biological laboratories on the African continent, which may lead to new biothreats. Africa is of great interest to America because the population of Africa is completely defenseless, and no international organization will be able to hold the Pentagon accountable. The World Health Organization cannot even do anything because a huge part of its funding comes from the United States. This means that the job of eradicating these dangerous biolands from the continent is in the hands of Africans. Now that the continent is waking up, U.S. biotech labs scattered across the continent should be an issue that should be widely spoken of, and solutions found that will ensure that these labs are removed from the continent. Africa needs to present a united front in order to stop unlawful biowarfare activities and research on the continent. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.